Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our meeting. I'd like to call the regular council meeting for Monday, December 16th to order. And I'd like to begin by acknowledging we are holding this evening's meeting in the traditional territory of the Wisanish people. And I look for a motion to approve the agenda, noting that we do have an addendum and revised lease for item 13C in our package.
Move approval as amended.
Second.
All those in favor? Opposed, motion carries. Thank you. We'll now move to public participation period. We ask any speakers wishing to address council this evening to please come forward, give us your name and address, press the little mic button for a red light, and please keep your comments to approximately 3 minutes. Good evening.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Jocelyn Gifford, 10448 Alt Bay Road. I wish to speak to the recommendations in the Committee of the Whole minutes concerning Skylark Lane. I was the Community Association representative on the stakeholder group for the West Side local area plan. And so I was frankly a bit baffled by some of the discussion last time. And I get the concern really is implementation, and a number of you seemed to me, I may have misunderstood, to be sort of saying there's no, how do we get from here to there in terms of this plan. And it seemed to me that there are mechanisms in the plan. I went back and I can't say that I read every single word of it, but I did review it. And yeah, there are issues around timing and implementation, but I think how we get there from here is relatively clearly laid out. I mean, I may be reading more into it, but what I kept thinking about last week was the village master plan. The implementation section of the West Side local area plan talks about, in terms of regulation and policy development, develop all, and this is short term, 0 to 3 years, develop all the regulations and policies as recommended in this LAP, including new zoning regulations and OCP policies. Then we have the village master plan, develop a detailed master plan of the village area that identifies A, the future location and dimensions of the greenway and green space network, and B, technical details of area-specific streetscape elements, light standards, paving, and so on. This will provide a valuable blueprint for staff and applicants, which will facilitate the creation of the village critical social and green infrastructure in a cohesive and viable manner. Consider the opportunity of including neighborhood wayfinding strategy as part of this action. And it's not really clearly specified here, but I have always assumed that West Side residents would be involved in this creation of the master plan. I would go, also the master plan was approved by council September 11th, 2017. It was interesting to go back and read my notes and so on. The council decision at that time had 4 components, but the ones I want to focus on are 3 and 4. that staff begin to develop zoning regulation, but no map amendments, and official community plan policies and guidelines for the redevelopment of the residential area to a mixed-use village as described in the West Side Local Area Plan for future consideration by council. Now, as far as I know, that hasn't happened. Then part 4, or recommendation number 4, on September 11th, 2017, was that staff forward items recommended in the implementation section of the West Side Local Area Plan for consideration as part of annual fall strategic planning and subsequent budget processes, including 1, pedestrian improvements along Galleran Road. I mean, you are addressing that. Relocation of the mailbox. Congratulations, people. That's such a simple thing, but it was such a hurdle. And development of a master plan for the mixed-use village, and that staff and explore options for expediting the movement of the Canada Post mailbox. Well, that's done. So you were talking last time about do we need to revisit the whole plan or not, and what sort of form should it take? I would argue that the master plan and the development and the zoning and so on proposals that should go with it really are what was envisioned in that. I think it needs a time frame. It's a while since 2017 now, and I really strongly support your decision, the recommendation that's before you tonight, to deny that application. I think one of the worst things that could be done to the West Side now is sort of piecemeal, incoherent approval of development. So I really, you recognized that last week, and I strongly support that. Somebody last week also, I forget whether it was Councillor Wainwright or the mayor, and I didn't look at the video, suggested that for development proposals on the west side, there are only 120 households there, that all of them actually should be notified rather than this 100-meter than that 100-meter boundary. So the question becomes, is it necessary to hire a consultant? It's a matter of staff time to do this, or a consultant. I believe that we have the skills in-house, so it's a matter of workload. I can see the kinds of issues that that the last council got into with hiring consultants to do all of the special planning reports, especially where there was consultation with residents involved. And I think that sort of creates problems that sometimes, or can create problems, pros and cons like everything else, where you get things that aren't as sort of embedded in the organization, or in the way the town thinks about things. So I'll close there, and I do think this master plan and the planning for the West Side mixed-use village, it needs to be done before development. And I'll close by wishing you all a very happy holiday season, council and staff. Thank you.
Thank you for the comments, and as it does come up in receiving our minutes for community of the whole, council will have an opportunity to discuss it further. Thank you. Is there anyone else wishing to address council this evening? Seeing none, we'll ask for a third time if there's anyone wishing to address council, and seeing none, I'll bring public participation to a close. Well, now we don't have any public hearings or presentations this evening. Under our new council procedure bylaws, we next move to bylaws, and we do have two bylaws this evening. Item 5A1 Bylaw number 2181, the Advisory Planning Commission, and we have a recommendation.
I'll move that the bylaw be considered for adoption.
Any discussion? Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. One thing I was just looking at when I was looking at this for a second time is Articles 4.3 and 4.4 and 4.5. And I don't know why, I never noticed it before, but it talked about that the APC would consider environmental matters, all matters regards to transportation, and then also heritage matters. And I guess it just occurred to me that we haven't used, as far as I know, APC for those sorts of things in the past. So I guess I'm just, pointing that out to council in terms of, especially the environmental matters and transportation that seem to be important issues. And if we see us perhaps going to APC for ideas or feedback. And I'm just wondering if that's the intent of those things, or, yeah, thank you.
Good question, Councillor Wainwright.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Those particular items got transferred to the Advisory Planning Commission when the Environmental Advisory Commission and the Heritage Advisory Commission were discontinued in the late 1990s. And the intent on the environmental side was considering environmental aspects related to developments, particularly, for example, development in one of our environmentally sensitive areas. There's only one slot on APC for a person with an environmental background, and I'm going to say 9 years out of 10 it's not filled by somebody with those qualifications, and it winds up just being a resident at large. And heritage is the same kind of thing. Heritage matters, typically the concern was heritage matters with respect to a particular development, say a demolition of a potentially heritage building. And that is what the Heritage Advisory Committee used to focus on. They did a little bit more. They identified, they had an inventory of buildings. But that's why those are in there, and I don't think council should look at trying to just generally refer an environmental or heritage matter to the APC. The other one with respect to transportation, that's pretty broad. It relates to planning and land use, but it's in terms of things that council actually wants to refer. So that one's always been fair game, but I don't think council has very often referred things. Usually when there's something like a traffic study, that gets referred to them for information more than anything else. Probably when we're developing our active transportation plan, I think we probably will be looking at referring it, but that's why they're in there.
Okay, that's fine. I'm just looking for a bit of clarity, and that's helpful.
Okay, I just want to add the comment that it is called the Advisory Planning Commission, and within the Local Government Act, planning encompasses different areas of planning. We do think of the APC as traditionally, being a review for development applications. That's one aspect of planning, as Councillor Wainwright has indicated. There are, and within this, within the bylaw, there are others. But you made the comment or asked the question with regards to would we go to the commission for ideas, and the way the structure is for us to refer particular items to the commission. Any further comments? I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries unanimous. Thank you. We now have second bylaw number 2185, miscellaneous fees and charges, amendment number 18, to amend the municipal road right-of-way permit fees.
Move introduction and first reading.
All those in favor? Motion carries.
Move second reading.
Any discussion? I do have a question and a suggestion for council to consider as an amendment to this bylaw. Point 3 within the bylaws indicates that it's to take effect on April 1st, 2020. And I think given the active developments we have in the community at this time and foresee coming forward in the coming months, that we might move that up to February 1st. We will have final adoption if we continue to proceed this evening to move it forward. We will have final adoption at some point at a council meeting in January, so we wouldn't want to have it brought up, I think, before February 1st, but I think it would be helpful to have it take effect sooner than that. Any discussion amongst, any comment from staff with regards to consequences for an earlier date?
We don't have any objection to that. The idea of having it on April 1st was to give contractors that already have on active projects time to adjust their the way that they use the right-of-way, so that if they wanted to move things off parking spaces so they didn't have to pay this extra fee, they would have some time. But it's fine if we did it as of February 1st, and then as the existing right-of-way permits expire, we would renew them based on this new right-of-way permit.
And so just to clarify again, through staff, permits tend to be on a monthly basis, and so a particular developer might have permits extending a number of months ahead of time. And so if this was to take effect on February 1st and a developer already had taken out a permit prior to that for February, that permit would exist. It wouldn't, they wouldn't have to reapply.
Correct.
Thank you.
So I'm happy to move an amendment to the bylaw to take effect on February 1st, 2020.
Second.
Any further discussion? I'll call a question on the amendment. All those in favor? Motion carries. Any further discussion on second reading? I'll call the question. All those, sorry?
Second reading as amended.
Yeah, yeah. So we'll call the question on second reading as amended. All those in favor? Opposed? And that motion carries.
Move third reading.
Second.
All those in favor? The motion carries unanimous. Thank you. We'll now move to item B. We do, under development permits and development variance permits, we do have a presentation this evening with regards to development variance permit application number DV 10028799495 Maryland Drive to reduce minimum building envelope width in order to allow a two-lot subdivision. And we welcome applicant and presenter Ryan Large.
Mr. Mayor, Council, my name is Ryan Large. I'm the applicant for the proposed subdivision at 9594 Maryland Drive. I'm proposing to subdivide the property into two single-family parcels. In order to proceed with the proposal, I understand that a variance is required to allow for a reduction in minimum building width from 9.0 to 8.38 meters. The reduced building width will not preclude the ability to construct functional interior living spaces. Furthermore, I believe that the proposed development, including two separate single-family homes, will be aesthetically pleasing, and the new homes will be built to improve the streetscape. Thank you very much for considering my proposal. If there's any other questions or anything?
Are there any questions, Councillor Garnett?
I just have a couple here. Will these homes be suitable?
No, they will not.
Price point?
1.1 to 1.2 million.
And the third question would be, are you planning on doing anything above and beyond what is required in terms of environmental standards in the BC Building Code?
We are open to anything that council proposes to us, for sure.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Any further questions? Councillor Duncan?
Oh, Councillor Garnett got the jump on me on some of them. I was just looking at the drawings and I see, so Lot B looks like it's got a roof access and A doesn't. So what is that roof access? Is that just a patio?
It's just up to a rooftop patio, yes.
Just a patio, okay.
Yeah.
And so one has one and
They
one-
actually both
Oh,
have.
they both do, okay.
Yeah, they both do.
And it's just harder to see on the drawing. All right. And I guess similarly, I had seen the calculations of all our values of things, and so I was wondering, this probably just comes out BC Building Code right now. And I mean, we have not implemented the increased rate of the step code, but anything you can do on that end is much appreciated.
Okay, great.
No, I don't think I had any questions for you. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Great, thank you, Councillor. Any further questions? Councillor O'Keefe?
Thank you. Just wondering about the rooftop patios and what kind of impact do you think that might have sort of on the neighboring properties and in terms of, I'm not sure how tall they will be, or I guess I'm thinking about neighbors who might be concerned about people on the roofs kind of looking down into their yard and
You
their
bet.
privacy.
Yeah, so we've designed with Java at design and staff. The patios are actually going to be located closer to the central top of the building.
Okay,
So the patio's sort of in the middle. It won't be lined up right on the exterior of the building, so you're not able to actually look down into the neighbor's patio, so they'll keep their privacy.
okay.
Yeah.
And it's just an aesthetic thing. So
Yeah.
are you kind of married to the external design? Myself, I found it sort of boxy and institutional looking myself, and I just wondered whether you would give any consideration to a different type of design that, I don't know, might fit in more with the neighborhood, do you think?
Yeah, we're open to looking at different designs. We've
Yeah.
sort of drove around the neighborhood and looked at some of the newer developments that are sort of on the same nearby streets.
Okay,
And some of them are, they're similar designs to those in the big boxy type look. But we're definitely open to chatting with council and looking at the design for sure.
yeah, okay, that's all
Okay.
for me,
Yeah,
thanks.
no problem.
Councillor Wainwright?
I'll move the recommendation in the report that owners and tenants in occupation of property within 75 meters, that's 246 feet, of 9495 Maryland Drive, be notified regarding development variance permit application number DV 100287 to permit a building area width of 8.38 meters, and that any written correspondence received be forwarded to council at the time of consideration of approval of the variance, and that if council authorizes the issuance of development variance permit number DV 100287, the following conditions apply. For Lot A, that portion of the driveway located on the municipal boulevard shall be limited to a maximum width of 3.5 meters, that's 11.5 feet, and be located directly abutting a line extending out parallel with the east lot line of the property. And for Lot B, that portion of driveway located on the municipal boulevard shall be limited to a maximum width of 3.5 meters, 11.5 feet, and be located directly abutting a line extending out parallel with the west lot line of the property. And finally, that a restrictive covenant be registered on the titles of the proposed Lot A and Lot B, limiting the driveway and parking area layout to that shown in drawing set version 3, site plan dated December 7, 2019.
Second.
Before discussion, I just want to thank Mr. Large for taking our questions this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor.
Councillor Fallon?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. A comment and then a question through to staff. There's comment that the driveway design has been done in such a way to keep as much street parking as possible by putting the driveways side by side. And there's also the comment about boulevard trees and looking at the green space. So my question, if I may, through you to staff, is just what is the plan for sidewalks in that neighborhood, and what is the life anticipated for those boulevard trees that would be planted today and hopefully stay there for tomorrow?
through the mayor to Councillor Fallett, I don't believe there's a plan for sidewalks to go into the area for quite a few years, but it would be in the 20-year plan. And regarding boulevard trees, the length of life of the tree would depend on the species that's selected by the Parks Department. That process is done for every fee simple subdivision like this one street tree per lot would be planted.
Mr. Humble?
I believe it's, I believe in the sidewalk plan, I believe it's 2036. It's the date.
And if I remember correctly, that would be on actually the opposite side of the street, so those trees would be safe. So I'm pleased to see that we're making the space available to maintain the green space and to increase our tree canopy, and that there is going to be a foreseeable future for those trees, so thank you.
Thank you. We have Councillor Garnett and Councillor Wainwright.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. A couple of comments. I drove the neighborhood and I can see where your design's coming from. I hadn't been down that area for quite a while, and I noticed that's going along Webster and other areas that has happened quite often. I guess a couple of things. I was saddened to see that the two conifers had been cut down in front, and I understand you didn't have to have a permit to cut them down. It was in your rights to do it. It just would have been nice to see the design around mature trees so that they could have been maintained. But the design you had didn't allow it. It's just sad for me to see those kind of trees go. I guess the other concern I have is with the housing needs assessment. And I checked out the duplex on Webster, and 1.165 million. You're talking about 1.1, 1.2. The fact they're not suitable basically eliminates 99% of the population from being able to afford the homes. And if they had a suite, then maybe a family might have been able to get in there because they would have had rent to help with mortgage. And then it also provides other housing opportunities in our community for people to rent a suite, because suites are a way we need to go in the future in our residential neighborhood. So that's basically the only comments I have is in the areas where I have concerns. But as far as your design goes, I have no problem with that specifically. Thank you.
Councillor Wainwright.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So my comments are partly for the benefit of the public. Our subdivision bylaw basically envisions that every lot has to provide a 9 meter by 9 meter square building envelope for a house, and then you've got your side lot setbacks. So they're close to the 9 meter width, and the lot's actually quite large. There's no question they can get a good sized house on it, but they're asking for the variance solely because we have this vision of a 9 meter by 9 meter square, and they're asking for a rectangle. Okay, I don't really see this as being a big issue, but it does need a variance. So the thing I guess I'd put out there for council to consider. Obviously, the world has changed in terms of size of houses and that sort of thing. Do we still want to hold to the idea that we've got to provide a square building envelope? And I don't see this as necessarily a high priority, but maybe something to give staff the opportunity to work on at some point and bring it forward if appropriate.
If I might just comment before council, while it does require a minimum of 9 meters by 9 meters, it can, in effect, go longer. So it could be a rectangle.
Yeah.
With those as minimums. So I appreciate we could change the minimum as well. Councillor Duncan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So just in effect, to make it, instead of having to get a variance, to have a rectangular house that is still, from these plans, I think 2,360 square feet. So these are still decently sized houses, and they have decently sized bedrooms. So by making it slightly smaller, we're not making unlivable, squishy houses by the looks of it. So would you be envisioning removing a minimum altogether, making it just square footage based?
Councillor Wainwright.
So I'm not actually going to put forward a proposal. In my view, staff would be better at doing something like that than me, but I guess I was thinking, yeah, there is probably a minimum, because I don't think a 3 meter wide house is going to be acceptable. some minimum width and a minimum square meters, maybe, but I would leave it totally to staff's discretion. It just seems to me that requiring a square of those dimensions is probably a little bit antiquated thinking. But and again, I don't see it as a really high priority. I don't think we have a huge number of subdivision applications, but from my perspective, I'd be receptive if staff wanted to bring forward a review of that.
Councillor O'Keefe.
Just a question. During our OCP review, I'm just wondering whether there's opportunity to bring this in somewhere, like when we're talking about design guidelines or lot sizes, or is it a fit with somewhere through those discussions, perhaps?
Mr.
Again, through the mayor. So it's not, it wouldn't really be the purview of the OCP review
Okay.
because it's not a development permit area. There aren't design guidelines for
Right.
this particular sort of zoning designation or OCP designation, so it wouldn't be a good fit, I don't think, for the OCP review. Perhaps following the OCP review, we could bring, as part of a comprehensive review of the zoning bylaw, or it's something that we could bring as a future miscellaneous items bylaw.
Councillor Duncan.
Thank you. I guess one question I'd forgotten I could have asked the proponent, but perhaps I'll ask staff through you. Is this within the area where we need to have an engineer's assessment? Is this within the flood construction level area?
Through the mayor to Councillor Duncan, no, it's higher than that. It's above an elevation of 5 meters.
Councillor Wainwright.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Not hearing any objections from council, I'm going to make the motion so it winds up in our tracking system. I'd move that we refer the minimum building envelope dimensions in our subdivision bylaw to staff for review as a low priority item.
If I might, Councillor Wainwright, with a motion on the table, could we have that as a motion arising
Thank you.
after? Thank you. Just one comment. I'm in support of this, but I want to thank the developer for requesting a variance on the width of the building envelope versus requesting a variance on the setback. So there is a setback of 1.5 meters required on the interior and exterior, and that would have resulted in increased mass. And I think, given that this is a subdivision with 2 homes, we appreciate there being 2 homes, but we appreciate the route that was taken. I'll call the question now. All those in favor? Motion carries unanimous. Thank you.
Okay. Has staff got the motion? Okay. Do I need to repeat it? Yeah.
Do we have a seconder?
Second.
Any further discussion? I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? That motion carries. Thank you. We'll move to now to adoption of our minutes. We have a regular council meeting of November 25th.
I'll move adoption of the November 25th meeting minutes.
Second.
All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. And our council organizational meeting minutes of December 2nd.
Second.
Those in favor? Motion carries. Thank you. I'll now move to the mayor's report. Just 2 items this evening. It gives me pleasure to thank Public Works and Parks Manager Brian Robertson and his team of Public Works for the tremendous festive community they've created with lights and decorations in the downtown every day. I know personally I'm getting a positive feedback from residents and businesses, and I know my colleagues are as well. So thank you to the team for that, and thank you also to the Sydney BIA, who entered into an agreement with some 40 businesses and a contractor to put additional lighting on some 40 businesses, which really added to the festive environment. Second, I'd like to thank Chief Brett Mickelson and the volunteer food drive that was done on Saturday. I don't know if it's a little early to give us some results of how successful it was, but we saw you out there and certainly appreciate the team volunteering to such a good cause in our community. And Councillor O'Keefe, you have a report?
Sure. So a few things, first of all, from the Chamber of Commerce. So an update on the home office workshop. That is now scheduled for February 25th at the Mary Winspear Center. The Chamber is finalizing topics and the budget to calculate the admission cost for the event. And I'm hoping to hear what the costs and the topics will be at a meeting that's taking place on Wednesday. The other thing that they were working on was the Youth Employment Tour of Industry, referred to as YETI. The original concept, as you may recall, was to have an event that was similar to the Tour of Industry for high school students at Parkland, Stellies, and the Tribal School. The objective was to help local employers who are having trouble filling positions, and this would be done by providing a tour for local students to raise their awareness of the different types of businesses, the types of jobs that are there, the education required, the salary, that sort of thing. The Chamber has moved away from this original concept as they felt there was too many logistical hurdles to overcome, and they didn't appear to be getting much support from the high schools. So the concept they're now moving along with is creating a list of 10 to 12 businesses that will be open at specified dates and times over a 4 to 6 week period in February and March. And students will drop in on their own to learn about these businesses. The local schools will not be officially involved, and the Chamber will use social media to advertise as students. So the way it will work is that students would be responsible to take the initiative on their own to get permission to participate in this, because it'll take place during school hours, to pre-register and to make their own arrangements for transportation. And so if council members have any questions or comments that they'd like me to provide back to the Chamber later this week on that change of concept, I'd be interested to hear that after, or now. I'll let you percolate on that for a bit. And I'll move on. Next topic. So the truck stop and info center. So I think I had mentioned to you earlier that they're working on plans for a new larger info center on the current site. Preliminary architectural designs have been completed. Meetings taking place with the MLA, Adam Olson, and First Nations Leadership Council. They're looking at a partnership that would involve the info center on one side of the building and a First Nations art and possible cultural center on the other side. The Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure is apparently very interested, and BC Ferries as well. Still some hurdles to get through because part of that land is on the ALR, but they seem optimistic about overcoming that hurdle. And once it looks like things are going to move along, then they'll officially contact other stakeholders like the town of Sydney and others as well. And the other report is from the Victoria Airport Noise Committee. So noise complaints were up 47%, and that was attributed mainly to noise from the construction taking place on the new the runways and off ramps, etc. And the noise from the backup alarm from trucks was a big deal, apparently, for the local residents. That beep beep noise. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Who knew you get sound effects in a councillor's report? Anyways, so they tried to mitigate that by making a request to the equipment, but it was going to take 8 weeks, and by that time the project was going to be finished, so they abandoned that. There's been some questions about those mounds of dirt that are there, and why are those there, and are they going to go? They're going to stay there because there's some new regulations coming out from Transport Canada, safety regulations, that is going to require berms to be set up at the end of runways. And I guess this is in response to accidents that have happened in urban areas where airports, where planes landing or taking off or running into roadways or residential neighborhoods. So those mounds will stay there, but they'll probably be moved closer to the runway. D&D reported that they now have 3 Cyclone helicopters, and they will get another 6 in the next year. Noise on those is expected to be not as bad because They vibrate at a different frequency, so apparently they're less annoying. Also of note is that there will be fewer training exercises because they do most of their training in a simulator in Halifax. So that was often an issue here with the old helicopters because they were out at night or in the morning, and people were not happy with that. But with these ones, most of their training will be done in a simulator, so there should be less disruption to the public. And finally, NAV Canada provided a presentation on a project called the Vancouver Airspace Modernization Project. It's a 3 to 5 year project that's been launched to deal with safety concerns related to the airspace around Vancouver, Nanaimo, and Victoria. And this was news to me that airspace is the most complex across the country due to the geography, the diversity of aircraft, the type of flights, etc. And 41 out of 48 safety issues that were identified in this study involved the airspace between Vancouver and Victoria. So I believe there's been some consultation started, but there'll be more of that that we'll see in the new year. So that's it for me, unless anybody has comments or questions.
Thank you, Councillor.
Okay.
Thank you, Councillor O'Keefe. We'll now move to committee reports, and we have the minutes from the Economic Advisory Committee meeting of November 22nd.
Move receipt of the minutes.
Call Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. Just a comment and perhaps a suggestion. I notice in the minutes that there's been arrangements made for different presentations from the BIA, the Chamber, and the airport. And I've been chatting to the SIP folks lately, and they were mentioning at the Breakfast Club meeting last week that they've got some interesting things that they're working on in regards to what they call the blue economy, the green, the marine industry, and the green economy as well, and environmental issues. So I thought that might be of interest to the Economic Advisory Committee. They're also still offering what they call an Economic Development 101 session, which I think we had kind of chatted about before, to come out to the committee and just explain to them what economic development means in our context, some of the work that they're doing with some of the other municipalities. So I just sort of toss that out to our liaison, Councillor Rintoul, if you think that might be something that they might be interested in. You could propose that if you wish.
Councillor Rintoul.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you to Councillor O'Keefe. Absolutely, the intent of the committee was to try and get some context for a fairly newly comprised group, and I think the addition of SIP and some of the insight, particularly around the blue economy and the green economy that you referred to, would be very informative for the committee, and so I'll certainly pass that recommendation on to the chair. Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you for those comments. Any further discussion? I'll call the question. Those in favor? The motion carries. Thank you. And we have our minutes from the Committee of the Whole meeting December 9th.
I will move in regards to the right-of-way permit fee.
Okay.
Sorry.
Just point of order, Councillor O'Keefe, if
Okay.
you could move the minutes, be received. We'll receive the minutes first as a first motion.
Okay. I'll move that the minutes be received.
Those in favor? Motion carries. Thank you. And there are 4 recommendations coming out of that meeting?
All right, first one, right-of-way permit fee. I'll recommend that the report dated November 29th, 2019, regarding a proposed right-of-way permit fee amendment be received for information.
Second.
Those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries.
And recommendation number 2, that official community plan amendment, application number OP100035, zoning amendment application number RZ100102, development variance permit number DV100288, and development permit application number DP100809 at 2140 Skylark Lane to reduce the width of a 2-way drive aisle and to change or reduce the requirements for Class 1 and 2 bicycle parking in order to permit the construction of a 3-story mixed-use commercial residential development containing 2 live-work units and 10 multi-family residential apartment dwellings be denied.
Any discussion? I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? We have 3 opposed. The motion carries.
And recommendation number 3 on the tenant assistant policy, that the tenant assistance policy DV 016 be adopted and that the policy be reviewed by Amenity to assess its performance and necessity.
Second.
Any discussion? I'll call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries.
And recommendation number 4, the proposed approach to the OCP review. That staff be directed to proceed with developing and issuing a request for proposal for consultant services to assist with a comprehensive review and update to Sydney's official community plan. And 2, that mayor and council send letters following project kickoff to affected organizations, advising them of the town of Sydney's intent to undertake a comprehensive review of the OCP and inviting them to provide early feedback, as well as providing information on additional opportunities for consultation as the project progresses. And number 3, that a small working group comprised of the mayor, Councillor P. Wainwright, the chief administrative officer, and the senior manager of long-range planning develop a terms of reference and establish the membership for an OCP steering committee and bring it forward to council for their information.
Discussion? Councillor O'Keefe?
I was interested, I'd like to propose amendment just to the last word there where it says, and bring it forward to council for their information. And I would change information to approval. So I think the OCP review is an important thing in the terms of reference. So I guess what I'd like to see is that council have the opportunity to review and provide additional input and approve the final terms of reference, just rather than receive it for information.
Second.
Discussion? I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Thank you, Councillor O'Keefe. We'll now move to staff reports, and we have item 13A, which is an update for the Sydney OCP Regional Contact Statement, a report dated December 20th.
I'll move the recommendation that in accordance with Section 448 of the Local Government Act, the proposed update to the Regional Context Statement for Town of Sydney Official Community Plan Bylaw number 1920 be submitted to the Board of the Capital Regional District for acceptance.
Second.
Discussion? Councillor Wainwright.
Question through you to staff. This is actually going to, once we get comments from the CRD, this would actually lead to an amendment to the OCP, is that correct? So public hearing and all the rest? I see nods. Thank you.
Councillor Duncan.
Thank you. I just, I guess, had questions through you to staff about some of the phrasing, and it shows up, and I've seen it in North Saanitch's as well, and I'm wondering if it comes from the RGS itself, or whether we have to stick with that phrasing, or if there's tweaks that can be made after that comes out to that public hearing. The phrase rural lifestyle kind of shows up, and I find that one a little grating, because part of the reason we have these urban containment areas to keep that rural area is specifically for agriculture and maintenance of green space, not to allow people to have a rural lifestyle with cottages and horses and whatever, right? So I feel like, and I've noticed this is becoming a problem, especially in Saanich, as they're trying to wrestle with the expansion into their green spaces as well, about what exactly we're maintaining and for whom, and how in Sydney, it's difficult for us to take all of this extra density. It's difficult for people to adapt to. And people are starting to feel like they're taking something which is unpleasant to them to maintain a lifestyle for somebody else. So I would propose that we change, if we can, the rural lifestyle to something like rural land uses, because that's what we're trying to maintain. That's why we're keeping this density in there. There was other wordings, but I guess that mostly was the question in there about how much of that comes directly from the RGS and how much of that wording we can change as we see fit.
Again, that was within item 1.2.
End of the first paragraph
it
of
is.
1.2.
It is in, yes, 1.2, the bottom of the first paragraph.
I'll ask if staff wishes to make a comment.
Through the mayor to Councillor Duncan, I believe that language is a holdover from the original regional context statement. I don't recall seeing it in the regional growth strategy. Certainly take your point and suggest that probably it would be good to change it. My suggestion would be to focus more on possibly agricultural type of wording rather than rural type of wording. Because really the intent there is to help maintain the agricultural focus of those communities rather than the rural focus of those communities if it was to go one way or another.
Well, I believe they also have like the CRDs, like the green corridors and things like that. So I thought that would be compatible as well. So I was okay with rural land uses because of the inclusiveness of the green corridors. But
And just a reminder, it is Sydney's OCP, so council can change it as they see fit.
Okay, so specifically you're recommending Councillor Duncan?
Well, it sounds like if we approve this is interim anyway. And then once it goes to the board, it comes back out to a public hearing. So at this point, oh, Councillor Wainwright was going to tell me otherwise.
Actually, a question for staff. If we modify it after we get comments from the CRD board, do we have to send it back to the CRD board for review again?
Yes.
So better
okay.
to adjust it now.
Okay. Well, then I have a couple. Okay.
Just before you proceed, Councillor Duncan, if I might, just for clarification from staff, I know it's in this report, but upon approval tonight, whether amended or not, it will go to the CRD board, and once the CRD board approves it, it is part of the regional growth strategy, CRD regional growth strategy, and that's amended with our regional context statement. When it comes, sorry, can you clarify stuff?
The only thing that gets amended is Sydney's OCP. The regional growth strategy stays as is.
No,
We just need a motion from the board that it's been accepted.
No, that's what I'm getting to is once the CRD approves it, it just becomes part of the regional growth strategy. The CRD board can choose to refer it back to the municipality if it has comments, but if it chooses to approve it, then when it's coming back to the municipality, it's not coming back as a referral from CRD, it's coming back just because the changing in the content requires an amendment to our OCP. And so then we go through an amendment to the OCP process, which has nothing to do with the CRD.
Correct. The amendment process has nothing to do with the CRD. Once the CRD board passes a resolution that it's been approved, it's basically set in stone, and we essentially must adopt that regional context statement into the town's OCP. I mean, council could obviously decide not to, and we'd have to send something back to them, but they would have to then accept it again through resolution in an amended version.
Right, and I just want to follow through on this process. So there is a deadline which is stated in the report, and I think it's February or March of 2020.
Correct, yeah.
That we need to do that. So does this first, if we approve it tonight, whether amended or not, and it goes to CRD, that meets the requirement of that deadline. And then if going through our OCP approval process, we choose to amend it, which would send it back to CRD, that wouldn't have any implication with the deadline. It would just be an amendment in the future.
The deadline is fixed based on when the regional growth strategy was adopted. So if council decides that this isn't something they'd like to see and would like changes, for example, if they send it to the regional board, it gets accepted, it comes back, council decides we'd like to do something different, the deadline is still the same because it's based on when the regional growth strategy was adopted.
I'll phrase my question a little differently. If we send it to the CRD board and they approve it the first time, we have thus met the deadline.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Okay, do you propose changes, Councillor Duncan?
I do. I have a couple of them. So there was in section 1.2, the end of that first paragraph, rural lifestyle to rural land uses. Section 2.1, second paragraph, we have a sentence. While the town recognizes this area as a working harbor, policy 10.2.2 encourages environmental protection through reasonable mitigation efforts and best management practices. I feel in this case, a working harbor that is a fishery, you know, we still have commercial fisheries out of there, that being able to drive home the point that environmental protection is part and parcel with maintaining a working harbor. Fishermen can't catch fish that don't exist. And a Peninsula Streams board meeting the other night, I heard that this harbor, CM Harbor, and up around this corner is actually one of the few places on the peninsula that they have documented forage fish right now. So we know that this is a key area. It is, for some reason, still got fish in it despite this working harbor use. And so what I would propose would be the town recognizes this area as a working harbor, and policy 10.2.2 encourages environmental protection through reasonable mitigation efforts and best management practices.
So the insertion of and?
Yep.
Okay.
And the removal of while, just to minimize the appearance of the conflict. Section 4.1, the last paragraph has a very interesting point about to enhance Sydney's connection, or sorry, is that the right one? The town will endeavor to improve access to and egress from the regional highway system as the public transit corridor for the peninsula. And it's kind of in the context of the cycling lanes, but on the same time, I was wondering if that was talking about highway access and egress, which I don't believe we have actually any mechanism. I'm not even sure we have any mechanism for how we would do that in terms of cycling trails. I don't know if we have much jurisdiction over any of that area. And so I was wondering if there were particular projects that were in mind when they wrote that, because it's either CRD at the Lochside Trail or MOTI with the traffic lights and overpasses. And I don't know what we could do there that was within our jurisdiction.
Just further, to add maybe a clarification to the question or a part to the question, does it mostly refer then to the to possible changes to the Beacon interchange, rather than proposing different access and egress points?
My understanding of that policy in the OCP was that it was more aimed at looking at priority bus accesses to facilitate quick transit on and off the highway. But I wasn't around when this OCP was adopted, so I'm not 100% sure on that.
So, for example, one of the things under consideration in the Transit Commission's submission to the province's South Island transportation study is queue jumping lanes and transit transit hubs or transit stations on the highway at the interchanges. So it could include something like that.
Sure.
Okay, so it's not specifically referring to new access or egress points from the highway.
No.
I mean, the province has been, I think, very clear that they're not looking to establish any future additional access egress points.
And I don't think the OCP is such a detailed document that it would get down to that level of, this or that.
I think that answers my question. As long as there was something that was within the plan that actually fit within there. I guess that the thing that I thought of when I looked at this was A lot of this was looking at cycling as something that would be going down the Lochside Trail and an actual point-to-point between Sydney and Victoria, which is 30 kilometers, and that our actual strongest use of moving multimodal transportation into bicycling is probably within the 10 kilometers of the peninsula, and particularly just the last mile stuff with people getting off the buses and going from Sydney out to West Sydney Industrial Park and the airport. And so I'm wondering if we could put in a word there that enhanced Sydney's connection with the Lochside Trail and the rest of the region. Finally, the town will endeavor to improve access to and egress from the regional highway system as the public transit corridor for the peninsula, and with last mile usage and links to the airport, ferry, and metropolitan core of the CRD.
So just inserting last mile with last mile links?
Last mile. I think it's a key concept.
Yeah, it's phrasing used in the
yeah.
provincial guidelines,
Yeah.
guidelines standards.
Exactly, that would bring that in.
Okay.
Food systems, section 6.1.
Sorry.
Yeah, for sure.
Can I back you up on that one?
For sure.
Because if you insert "and with last mile links to the airport, ferry, and metropolitan core of the CRD,"
Oh, you're right. Okay. With last mile links to the airport, ferry, and that would be, Saanich Peninsula, scratch metropolitan core of the CRD, and just Saanich Peninsula. Oh, sorry, you know what? That's already in there. It's a public transit corridor for the now my whole sentence doesn't work. Sorry. From the regional highway system is a public transit corridor and last mile linked for the peninsula, period.
Sorry, I haven't followed you there, Councillor Duncan.
So that sentence would be, finally, the town will endeavor to improve access to and egress from the regional highway system as the public transit corridor and last mile link for the peninsula, period. And then remove the rest of that sentence.
Okay, I think it's important to include airport and ferry. I mean, the airport on the west side and the ferry. I don't think, quite frankly, it's perhaps necessary to include the metropolitan core at all, because our access is to North Saanich going south, which of course goes to the metropolitan core. So while that's an endpoint, it's not the adjacent. Mr. Humble, we're getting into the weeds here. I appreciate that.
I know council appreciates this, but this is an interim measure, right, until we go through the OCP review, and we'll be recrafting the entire regional context statement at that time as well. So I just wanted to point that out as well to council. I mean, we will be going through an entire fulsome process with respect to the regional context statement as part of that OCP review process.
And thank you for that. And while this document does go to the CRD, does get incorporated into the regional growth strategy, in terms of action, it's going to happen in our municipality through an OCP review or for whatever policy or action we take. And if we in fact do take that, then the OCP gets amended, and we can choose to update the regional context statement to the CRD.
Which is why I didn't bring all of the points up before, but then Councillor Wainwright suggested that this was in fact the last chance.
Okay.
So
Well, if you want to leave.
I only had one more edit. I don't
Okay.
know whether I should continue with it.
Well, perhaps we could leave that one, and if you do have an additional one, I'm not restraining you. I just suggest.
So the last one was in section 6.1. Within fostering a resilient food and agricultural system, I would argue that because Sydney has a large industrial and commercial area, and Sydney historically was cannery and fisheries, that putting in we should have something in there, and I actually didn't have a statement crafted for that to say that one of our roles could be to enable foster food processing and storage, because that's a huge missing link in actually making this the food system on our peninsula sustainable, and something that growers have been bringing up as a key stress for them. So.
Okay. I might, Councillor Wainwright?
My suggestion would be that the first two amendments you proposed were clear and supportable, and the other two, I think you need to spend a bit of time on. And since this is an interim context statement, and we get to do over in our OCP review, that we take advantage of the OCP review to do it properly and just tick the box and get it out of the way. So,
Are you amenable to that? Okay, so Councillor Rintoul.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just to point out, 6.1 also uses the phrase rural lifestyles, and if that was part of the initial motion, just to staff, that change be made in those two locations, not just the one, to reflect land uses as opposed to rural lifestyles. Thank you.
Good catch. Any further discussion? I'll call the question on the amendment, on the two amendments. So this is not on the main motion, it's on the two amendments. Those in favor? Motion carries unanimous. And now I'll call the question on the amended motion. All those in favor? Motion carries unanimous as well. Again, thank you, and thank you for that discussion, Councillor. We're next going to move to item 13B, which is a Summergate Village land use contract / zoning process, and we have a report from staff dated December 10th.
Mr. Mayor, I will recuse myself. I'm an owner in that strata, so I will not be part of that discussion.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Fallon.
I'll move that a review of the Summergate Village R4 zone be undertaken following adoption of a new Town of Sydney official community plan, and that staff work with Summergate Village Strata Council to organize a public open house in early 2020 for all Summergate Village residents that include a presentation by staff on key elements of the Summergate Village regulatory structure for informational purposes.
Second.
Any discussion? I'll call the question. All those in favor? Motion carries. Thank you. If we can, I need to look up faster. Thank you, Councillor Howlett. We'll now move to item 13C, which is the public parking lot lease for 3rd Street and Sydney Avenue, a report that was updated today.
I'll move the recommendation that council approve the parking lot lease agreement between the Town of Sydney and FHD Nominee Ltd.
I'll second.
Second, any discussion? Call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? That motion carries unanimous. We'll now move to item 13D, use of gas tax funds, and we have a report from staff dated December 9th.
I'll move receipt for information.
I'll second.
Discussion. Councillor Duncan and Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Mayor. I guess had a question through you to staff for item number 3. Have we begun adding battery capacity to that, or is that still fully grid tied? Have we been investigating that? At the Public Works yard, we have an
Yeah.
installation of solar power
Mhm.
at the Public Works yard.
Yeah.
And I remember when we did a tour, there was kind of a discussion of fact that we don't have battery. And so one of the things about adding solar capacity is that presumably it would be a resilience measure. But if we don't have any battery capacity and no plans for battery capacity, it isn't. So I'm just wondering if we have plans for that.
I'll defer to Mr. Robinson, but it certainly would be eligible under the program.
Could I comment?
Councillor Maynard, sorry.
So I have solar panels on my house, and I've gone through the same thought process, and it sounds really good to have a battery pack to be independent, but keeping in mind the winter months, like today, where it's short daylight and it's rainy and cloudy and the solar panels are hardly producing anything. So to keep the batteries topped up, to actually be able to give you that kind of backup capacity, needs a lot of solar panels to be able to ride out these short day length, low production months. And it's actually way cheaper to have a backup power generator than to buy that battery bank and put in the extra panels. And we already have, as my understanding, a backup generator for the Public Works yard. So I'm not really seeing it as a resiliency kind of thing. We could increase the number of panels and just up the production, because my understanding is we're on the net metering system, so if we produce excess, it just goes into the grid, and we are helping everyone, and that is more resilient, and probably more cost effective than the batteries. That would be my take on it. I'm sure staff could look into it.
Through the mayor, we didn't go into the battery thing for a couple of reasons. The drawdown, the amount of charge that you have and the length of time that you can hold that charge versus the drawdown is a little bit of a hard model to play around with. The other issue that we got stuck with at the workshop was based on the size of our service coming into the facility. We've got two smaller services that we've joined together. So we've actually maximized the capacity now that we can feed back into the grid based on the panels that we have without providing another service in there. And it's like Councillor Wainwright said, we do have diesel generator backup power at the workshop as our fail-safe on that. But certainly other buildings around town, any other developments that might happen where we would look at applying a new power service in there, we would be cognizant of the fact that, hey, if we upsize the service at the time of the build in order to allow for a certain amount of area of solar panel, we would certainly take that calculation into effect.
Great, thank you for those comments. I think in the context of this report, and that is use of the gas tax funds, I think it's important to note, as Mr. Hissick reported, that this would be eligible if we wanted to make changes such as been proposed one way or another. Those would be eligible under the gas tax revenues. Other comments? Other discussion? Sorry, Councillor Kate? Oh, Councillor Granite?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Gotta give me a stronger sign.
I do the Peter Wainwright one. Question through you to staff. With regards to the Kenora Road improvements, do we have a finite timeline when we're talking about that might be happening?
It needs to go through a replanning process before we actually come up with detailed designs. So maybe look at the preliminary design that was done about 6 to 8 years ago. Add the new context of what's been done on the airport side, along with the drainage works on the airport lands, and kind of bring it back to council as another draft before we take it any further. So we do have that within the 5-year capital plan, and we hope this time that we won't keep pushing it out to year 5, volume permitting, and there's only so long we can do that.
Thank you. I was just wondering if we shouldn't be, because it's bound to be a fairly large cost to do all the work there, and I know North Saanich is going to be involved with us, but I'm wondering if we shouldn't be starting to put some money aside for it based on what it's going to cost. And it is something that's going to have to be done from several different reasons: safety, the sidewalk, cycling lanes. It's used quite regularly by residents in the neighborhood, and not just residents in the neighborhood, but residents from all over Sydney. And also, it's a main thoroughfare for residents of Sydney to go to the airport, come from the airport, and people who work at the airport. There's many vehicles that go up and down that corridor every day. So I just think it's something that we might want to think about putting some money towards, putting money towards, given that it's not going to be in the too far horizon that it's hopefully will be getting accomplished. It's just some thoughts I had.
Okay, so for clarification, thank you. For clarification, you were speaking to not only Gallerin, but the Beacon West McDonald Park Road corridor?
No, Kenora Road, the Kenora Road we share with North Saanich.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, fair enough, sorry. Councillor O'Keefe, then Councillor Infill.
So my understanding is that it's proposed that we're gonna receive this for information. And so that the projects that are here, that I don't think that staff are necessarily looking for us to decide what we're gonna do with these. I presume that would take place during the budgeting process. I know that there's a possible recommendation to provide direction to staff with respect to how we define, what sorts of things we'd use to finance. But I'm happy with the motion as it is, to receive it for information. In terms, I think that once we go through the budgeting process, that would be the time to, talk about whether to use gas funds or reserves, or, how we play the game with different pots of money. So I'm just happy to receive this for information at this time.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Rintoul.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And while I concur with Councillor O'Keefe in terms of a general comment from my perspective for staff, in that this is not necessarily long-term funding, but over the course of the next 4 years, and may be extended, may not. I like the approach that you have been taking in putting forward projects that we can complete with these funds, looking at it on an annual basis, versus setting aside a portion of this in the big picture. It's not a tremendous amount of money at $549,000, but to be able to get some projects done with that money, as we've been doing in the past, versus taking a portion of it and tucking it away. I think if it were a longer term sort of sustainable source of funding, we could look to develop policy of that nature. But I'm content with the approach staff has taken thus far with respect to utilizing those funds. And like my colleague, Councillor O'Keefe, I'm happy to receive the report for information. Thank you.
Any further discussion? I'll just, I concur in those comments from both colleagues. But I want to take it just at a slightly higher level for a moment. On page 2 of the page 2 of the report. On page 2 of the report, it makes reference that there are several projects in the current financial plan that are expected to be funded from gas tax, and there are 6 projects listed totaling just over $1.3 million. Those would be in the 2020-21 years, if I do my math correctly on the budgets there. The question is it typical for council? So those decisions were made by a previous council. I don't think approved those last year, or one of them the Gallerin Sidewalk might have been an amendment that we did. But is it typical to allocate future gas tax revenues or gas tax revenues into future budgets that far ahead?
It is typical, but it can be reviewed each and every year as new information comes available, and it's preferable to have a full 5-year funding plan in place, but it can always be amended if better projects come to the forefront.
Okay, so the comment I want to make is actually in the context of this report and the next 2 reports. So this report is with regards to the use of the gas tax fund. The next report is with regards to the town reserve funds, and the third one is an amended policy for the bonus density community amenity contributions. So 3 very important funding sources for what we do in our community, and I certainly appreciate the depth and that these three reports are brought forward together this evening. But in addition to those sources, of course, there's borrowing, and there's taxes. And so when I look at these three reports and I look at these different sources of funding, my preference is to actually, which I think we've been proceeding in our budget processes, is to say what are the most important capital projects to be done in our community. And once we're setting those priorities or getting it down to at least a short list, then we look at these different sources of the funding, whether they be the reserves, whether they be borrowing, whether they be gas tax, whether they be amenity contribution, rather than trying to say, okay, let's this is important, let's apply gas tax to that ahead of time. Let's look at it together, sort of thing. So that's just a comment, and as I say, it's very helpful to have these three reports come forward in the depth they are this evening. But I concur that I'm happy to receive this report and thank you for the information about future budgeting or future allocations. Councillor Duncan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I guess because you'd brought up these projects and the solar panels again, and that this was kind of something that was getting us to go through about what would be eligible and why we would want to use gas tax funding. Now, I look at this mainly as gas tax funding as something. Well, partly it's just a way to distribute money back down, but it's also something that we're I think of that the highest use would be to be able to use it for projects that decrease carbon emissions. I mean, it's funding from burning fossil fuels. Can we do that, put it into infrastructure that will help us? And that's just kind of a win-win. And a lot of, the criteria that the province has set out is somewhat towards that, not all of it. So we're building solar panels, and so this was my question about the battery power, because on the one hand, if it's something that we see as a resilience measure for those winter times when our power goes down and people are without, and there was some way we were building an additional energy source in, then I would think this was a good use of money. If it's a way that we are trying to create a revenue source because solar panels are cheap enough that the net metering is getting us some income, then I guess an argument could be made. But I don't see this as a carbon reduction strategy at all. Research that I just have been doing indicates, solar panels by 2050, like the best possible carbon intensity you can get out of them is about 12 tons of carbon emissions per watt that you get out of them. And BC Hydro right now is running at about 10.7 on average. So, a carbon pan or a solar panel that was made entirely by factories run with other solar panels or wind turbines, you could get it down to 3.5, but we don't have that capacity. Nowhere on earth are factories run with wind power and solar panel or solar power. They're all run by coal. They're all built in China out of coal, and the ones that actually publish their carbon intensity, they're looking at something like anywhere from 12 to 25. So 25 is the highest worst year that BC Hydro will have for a carbon intensity for when our reservoirs run low and we have to use our thermal coal to offset it. So I feel looking at the actual carbon emission benefits rather than just solar panel, everyone thinks they're good, but here in BC where we're already on pre-existing hydro, where all of the off-gassing and all of the carbon and methane emissions of our hydro has been settled and is gone for a good 60 years, these are not improvements. They're improvements somewhere where they burn coal, where they're burning diesel, but not here, and that there's a lot better things we could use spending. In this case, the food bank would be $80,000 for something that would be a genuine greenhouse gas emission mitigation. So
I think, if I might interject, I think your point's well taken in terms of what you're saying in terms of since this money arose from fossil fuel burning, could we use it for fossil fuel mitigation or reduction? And I think we can certainly take that. I think we don't have specific projects, before us or that have been brought before us to consider application of an allocation of a certain portion of gas tax funds. But I think as initiatives come forward through the budget process, we can certainly put that lens on consideration of the capital projects, and I think those points are well taken. Thank you. Any further comments? I'll call the question. All those in favor? Motion carries. Thank you. So we'll move to the next report, which is 13E, the detailed report on the town reserve funds, again from CFO Mr. Hissick, dated December 4th.
I'll move the recommendation that council receive this report for information, authorize staff to bring forward a bylaw amendment to consolidate the contingency reserve into the general capital reserve and abolish any reserves deemed to be unnecessary.
Second.
Any discussion? I do have a question. Within the report through the staff, Mr. Hissick, with reference to the sewer capital and the water capital, I think I followed your report there, but is it possible we could be collapsing those into the infrastructure reserve or general capital now?
Essentially, it's being used for as a supplement to the infrastructure reserve. So when they're depleted, they'll just be depleted. It could be the same as it rolling them into those reserves right now. But rather than doing that, it'll just take a couple of years for all the money to be gone anyway.
Okay. I guess my question is, does it tidy it up now, or is it just it's fine the way it is, and it'll
okay.
tidy itself up in due time? Okay. My second question was with regards to the infrastructure reserve, and there was reference made in somewhere in the report under replacement reserves, I think, or reserves, that there was a certain portion of infrastructure reserves. Now, appreciating that we have 20-year plans for sidewalks, for example, for curbs, and I don't know whether it's curbs and gutters, are those plans basically funded within that infrastructure reserve? Or is it more complicated?
It is, because as I touched on in the report, in the past those replacement reserves have been used on occasion for new infrastructure, and that's not really the point of them. So as we look into the future of the plan, and earlier it was mentioned that perhaps Maryland was in there for 2036 as new infrastructure, I'd like to, as we amend those plans, to move away from that and to fund the new infrastructure from a different source and have these replacement reserves purely for replacement. I think that'll be a cleaner way to do it.
Okay, and I think your reports, or the points well taken in the report about that, with it should be replacement, but that then, you know, if the infrastructure reserve is in fact just a replacement reserve, along as vehicle replacement is, as fire vehicles, computer, ferry terminal, those are all replacement. What then has traditionally been the source of new sidewalk or new sidewalk infill funding?
Over, let's say, the last 8-10 years, it's been property taxes. But then when the gas tax fund eligibility rules were relaxed about 8 years ago, then we started using gas tax for that. And that's been the biggest impact in keeping the tax increases to a minimum over the past 5 years, is this new eligibility criteria. So in future, I would like to look at gas tax and amenity reserve as ways to infill the sidewalk network and to build new. But one thing we need to develop over the next several years is a long-term plan for how we do that infill. Whereas maybe in the past it would have been part of the 20-year capital plan, I think this needs a new plan for new sidewalk as opposed to replacement, which should be covered in the infrastructure, if that makes sense.
It does, but I thought the sidewalk, the 20-year sidewalks plan actually included infill and new sidewalk from time to time.
I think it has in the past, but we'd love to move away from that, just to keep the discipline of replacement versus new.
Okay, no, that's I see the merits in that. Thank you. Okay, that answers my questions. Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. I just have a question about the replacement reserves through you, Mr. Mayor, to staff. So we have computers, vehicles, fire vehicles as well. How much flexibility do we have to move stuff around? Is there flexibility to move stuff around within the replacement reserves? And I guess, I'm noting like the comments made about, sometimes you find deficiencies, so maybe you get a good deal on computers, so you don't need all the money that's in there. So do we have flexibility to move amounts, say, from computers to fire vehicles? Or are we restricted by the bylaw as to what we use it for?
In terms of a permanent move, we are restricted by the bylaw, but for temporary borrowing from one reserve to another, that's fair game. Other than the reserves identified here as redundant, I would say we don't have any extra funds in any current reserve where we can move to another right now.
Okay, so the amounts that we have for those items now, we're confident that there's no excess there, that we would use them up. Okay.
I have a
Thanks.
supplemental question to that. So in your chart of the 16 reserve funds, the first 6 or so, it shows the 2019 contribution. And so those are contributions that are made in staff. I don't know whether it's contained within the bylaw or staff make a calculation each year in terms of how it will be topped up or increased.
Mm-hmm.
But for example, in the computer one, if for some reason the life use of usable life of computers was extended to the network, such that $30,000 or $50,000 wasn't spent in a given year, is it permissible within the bylaw not to allocate additional reserves in a given year, therefore allowing you to use that money elsewhere?
Well, to be honest with you, there's a couple of reserve contributions here that are probably a little deficient. Computer and vehicle being the two that come to mind. So rather than ask for more funds, we've been trying to go through the efficiency exercises to try and bring the reserve in line with what we're putting away. But if we ever do get to a situation where we think it's too much, we'll let you know.
Okay, that's a good answer. Thank you.
Okay.
Any further discussion? I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. And we'll move to item 13F, which is the amended policy DV013, bonus density and community amenity contributions.
To get things started, I'll move that town policy DV013, bonus density and community amenity contributions be approved as amended.
Second.
Discussion. A question I have through the staff is number 5, within the policy. Number 5, the first paragraph, or number 1 is crossed out, and I understand why that is, but that leaves the top paragraph, the top portion of the next page. That's still considered, or sorry, I have it now. 5.1 is being, the old 5.1 is being deleted, and that's the new 5.1.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. Councillor O'Keefe?
Oh, okay. I'm still having reservations about abandoning the affordable housing fund. I know that we haven't tapped into it much, and so there's concern about that, which is understandable. But I guess what's currently in my mind is that we've just finished the housing needs assessment, going into the OCP review. Most of us are new on council, and so we haven't had a lot of time to really put our minds come up with some tangible ideas and how to use that. But I'm still confident that that we should be able to come up with some ideas on how to be making a better use of that fund. So I guess I'm inclined at this time, unless I'm interested to hear other views, about continuing to maintain that fund, so that it kind of forces us or future councils to do something about it. I'm afraid if it just gets rolled into a general amenity contribution, that we might not be as motivated or prompted to use that. So
If I could respond to that,
Okay.
I think it's kind of double-edged. On the one hand, while you might think it, by bringing them together, it takes away from the housing fund, in effect, what it does is it creates a larger fund itself. And so if we decided it was a priority, we would actually have a larger amount to apply. By combining the two within the amenity, we would actually have a larger amount to apply to affordable housing initiatives. And I think as the policy retains the use as affordable housing, that we're not losing the intent of the policy. The intent of the policy is still there, but there's actually the opportunity for increased funding to attainable housing rather than putting what is currently allocated at risk. Just for thought. Councillor Wainwright?
I'm going to play devil's advocate a bit. There's nothing to stop us from using the general amenity fund now to do affordable housing, even though we've got an affordable housing fund. So we could always use the general one to top up the affordable housing one if we needed to. Having said that, I do think there's merit in combining them, because the previous council had that in place for a fair while, and we've had it in place since the start of our term, and we've yet to see any project come forward to draw on that, and we haven't had any creative suggestions from anybody on how we might spend this. So that's not to say that when it finally adds up to several $1 million that we wouldn't do something with it, but collecting these amenity contributions off development, we really should, in my view, be putting them back into the community and not banking them for an extended period. Like, to have this money sit there for, say, 5 years and not use it, to me is actually offensive. So I would rather have it unrestricted, and actually have some policies about spend the money, don't hoard it. It's because we're supposed to be, we're collecting this money so that we can provide a benefit, to an amenity benefit, to the neighborhoods in our community that's being impacted by higher density. That's kind of the concept behind it. So if we don't spend the money and don't provide those benefits, it seems to me we're failing people.
Councillor Keith and Councillor Fallon?
So in terms of, yes, we've been on council for a year and we haven't spent any of that money. So we did have discussions about some ideas. I had brought forward some ideas on how we might spend that, but the feedback I had at strategic planning is that we should wait until the housing needs assessment was done, and we should be having that information first before we move forward to make plans on what type and amount of affordable housing we would need. So housing needs assessment we just recently got, and I think I'm concerned. I get the point about wanting to spend it for the community, but I continue to be concerned that if we put it into a general amenity fund, we won't be any further ahead in terms of affordable housing. I just feel if it's targeted for that, now that we've done the housing needs assessment, we're in a better position to start bringing forward ideas. And so I'd like to give us at least a little bit of time to put our mind, to wrap our heads around that, and to motivate us to spend that money.
Councillor Fallon?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I played around for quite some time as to putting it in separate accounts, putting the money all in the same pool and being able to have a larger amount of money for investment, etc. One of the things that stood out in one of the reports as I was reading them was staff had said that we shouldn't save money for a future community to benefit that a current community is paying for, current taxpayers paying for something that's down the road. And that struck something in me for, it's different when you're dealing with public money than when you're dealing with your personal money. You're looking towards the future. When you're looking at public money, your thinking has to be somewhat different. And I take Councillor Wainwright's point about spending the money today. By the same token, I think we have an economy right now, a market that isn't giving us proposals for affordable housing hand over fist right now. And I think it is in our best interest as a community to continue setting aside affordable housing funding for the future, because it is my belief that when the economy changes, when the marketplace changes, we will be getting proposals. And I would like to be able to be there front and center with a pocket of money to say we can work towards a goal that I think is important. It was also interesting several months ago when we were talking about using amenity funds, and I can remember conversation with Councillor Duncan and myself as we were sitting at the table, and I had thought to use amenity funds for sidewalks, and then it was pointed out sidewalks should be something that we as a town provide for our community, and that should not be an amenity. And so it's really interesting how you sort of wrap your head around what is standard items that are supplied for our community to be a community and what becomes an amenity and how that is looked at. So I would like to continue keeping our attainable affordable housing fund separate from our general amenity fund. And I believe the time will be coming that we can use that money. I don't see it right now. I don't see anybody coming forward with another proposal such as the workforce housing or something else similar, but I think we do need to work towards something happening in the future and be ready for that. Thank you.
Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Stole my thunder there. I completely agree with Councillor Fallett. I think it's tempting to put it all into one fund. My fear is that then you find there's lots of things in our community that we can put the money towards, but then what if that day does come? And I'm hopeful that it will come, and I want us to be prepared. And so if we don't have the resources available to work with whatever entity wants to provide affordable housing in our community, where does that leave us? And these are the people in our community that we've seen in our housing needs assessment that are the most dire need. So I just don't want to leave people hanging. If we have an opportunity, no matter when it comes, we need to be prepared. I don't want to be having that money not be available and be going, wow, if only we'd have kept it. So I like the way it is, and I think we should maintain it. Thank you.
Councillor Duncan.
I'm on the fence with this one myself, simply because the other hand of Councillor Fallett's thoughts that the market will begin changing and eventually a project will come up is that I think by the time the market changes and something will come up, stuff will be more affordable and they'll be able to build it without our help, because that's really the only place left that our market can change to. If it gets more expensive, the pot of money we have will do even less and less. Whereas at this point, when you've got people paying 90% of their income for their housing month after month, year after year, eventually stuff tanks. What cannot be sustained will not be sustained. And once Vancouver's market starts going, I don't know, I just see it coming down. And I think about the size of that pot of money relative to what we would need if the market continued the way it is to actually make a difference. What do we have, 2.4 million now? And got that money by doing, I mean, the largest land sale in Sydney's entire history was the fire hall. And I just wonder how many other projects we would have that's going to be pitching any significant funds into that pot. How much higher that pot's actually going to go, and how many years it would take before we actually had a pot of money we could do something significant for housing in a market where housing was still being just built unaffordably. And so I'm just kind of looking at it wondering if this is a good use of public funds at all relative to the size of the pot we can get in a town our size to the scope of the problem. I haven't thought about the most efficient housing we could do was helping to fund secondary suites at 60 to 80 grand a pop. You're looking at like 25 suites that we could, like 25 is all we could do with that money. And how many hundreds of units of housing had to be built, with that increased density in order to get that money. So I don't know. It would be nice if a project came up that somehow this pot of money could act as some sort of a seed money or multiplier, but I'm just wondering if that project's out there at all, and if tying ourselves to making it always have to be towards affordable housing means it will be sitting there for many, many years, and we simply won't be able to use it because it just won't come up.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor O'Toole.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Could I, through the mayor to staff, just clarify the size of the fund we're referring to on the housing side? I see in the report under discussion refers to just over $500,000. So under discussion, first paragraph.
That is the current balance, but if you look at the potential collections from prior developments that have been approved but have not yet proceeded, the total amenity balance could be as high as $2 million, with the housing portion being $1.4 million.
Yeah. Thank you. And so I tend to concur with the comments Councillor Duncan made, and also Councillor Wainwright, from the standpoint that those funds have been held for this purpose and not utilized. There's demand in many areas of the budget. What's suggested here certainly doesn't dismiss the prospect of using these for attainable, affordable housing projects. In fact, it's first on the list for consideration. But I feel it's somewhat incumbent on council to use the resources in hand, as opposed to be looking at either further taxation to fund projects. And so I'm supportive of the motion that's before council. Thank you.
I just one question through the staff is on the last page, or second last page of the amended policy. So that would be 7.1. It lists the funds collected as amenity contributions shall be applied to the following eligible project categories. As Councillor O'Toole pointed out, the first one is attainable and affordable housing, and then there's 7 others. The ninth one is other projects deemed by council to have a community benefit. Are there then any exclusions?
That last point was just to leave it somewhat open-ended. All of this would be approved through the budget process. So if we think it's worthy of consideration from amenity funding, we'll bring it forward as such, and it's council's decision in the end.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Wainwright?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. In our previous discussion about this, and it was alluded to earlier, one of the issues that came up was, should sidewalk infill and extension projects be considered an amenity? And I'd like to, and I'll point out that we've got on this list other projects deemed by council to be a community benefit. So even if sidewalks is not in the list, somebody can bring one forward at budget time anyway, but I would prefer personally not to have it on the list. So I'd like to move an amendment to the motion that's on the floor to approve the policy as is, to strike out 7.1b, which would remove sidewalk infill or extension projects from the list of eligible projects.
Second.
Okay, if I may make a comment, or in that we heard earlier in reference to some questions I asked with regards to the replacement reserves, and that staff were looking to move forward in that reserve being for replacement, that the two sources for new sidewalk or infill sidewalk would be taxation or the amenity fund. So if we remove it from the amenity fund, we're looking primarily at taxation. Is that correct?
And gas tax.
And gas tax, okay.
And borrowing.
Municipalities borrowed for sidewalks before? Possible, anything's possible.
Generally as part of a larger roads project.
Okay, we have a motion, we have a seconder, any further discussion? So this is on the amendment to remove 7.1B. I'll call the question, those in favor? Opposed? The motion carries. Any further discussion on the main motion? I'll call the question, all those in favor? Opposed? The motion is defeated. Okay, so we do not have an amended policy.
So, it seems to me we probably would benefit by having an amended policy. And I'm not entirely sure what it would take to make people happy, but I'm guessing that some of the members would vote in favor if we kept the attainable and affordable housing section that is crossed out. So I'm going to try a motion that we adopt the policy that's being presented with the deletion of 7.1B, which is the sidewalks, and the retention of paragraphs 7.1 and 2, which are currently crossed out, which are the ones which delete the attainable and affordable housing. And I believe that's all that's necessary to keep that. Yes.
I'll second.
Discussion, Councillor O'Keefe?
What I'm wondering is, whether
Your
a
mic.
com-
Your mic.
Oh, sorry. Thank you, Councillor Rachel. Whether a compromise might be to change the percentages. And so perhaps would a 50-50 split be more appealable to folks, so that we're still retaining the attainable and affordable housing fund, but we're freeing up more to go into general amenities. So just toss that out there for discussion, perhaps.
I would like to raise a point of order through to staff. On the last motion that we voted on that was defeated, I voted differently than I intended to. Is there a procedure?
Yes, the mayor can ask to reconsider. And you were on the winning side of the vote, so you can.
I was intending to move the motion, but it was when the sidewalk was mentioned that I voted against the amendment. I wasn't intending on voting against the motion. I was speaking in my comments to actually combining the two. So if I could ask.
If you're intending to ask for that motion to be reconsidered, I'm happy to withdraw this motion.
Okay. And that motion, was that motion seconded?
Yes. By Councillor Fowler.
Rescinded? Okay. So I would ask council to consider rescinding the previous motion. To reconsider the previous motion.
That's basically just call the vote again.
Okay, thank you for that point of order. I will call the question. All those in favor?
So now we're back to that town policy DB 013 bonus density and community amenity contribution be approved with the 7.1B being removed. And we're re-voting on that again.
So by approving this motion, we would be combining
Yes.
the two into one amenity fund.
Just this is deleted.
Yeah.
This is still in it. So if it's not being separated, so you're voting on approving their changes with the pooled funds.
Pool as opposed to what it is now.
Yeah.
I'll call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? The motion carries. Thank you. My apologies for that.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes.
may I just clarify a point about this new policy change?
Yes.
I'm envisioning keeping the segregation of the different amenity funds as is. So there's 500,000 in housing, so we'd keep it that way. It's just moving forward, we would treat it differently. Is that the intention of council?
Yes, thank you. You did speak to that in the report and giving us the alternative whether to leave it separate or to combine it at the same time we're amending the motions. So if council would like to consider or make further comment, I would be in favor of combining, but I think it works either way. Councillor Duncan?
So I guess question for you to staff. So in effect, going forward, we'd have 3 pots of money in that account. What it would be housing, general, and then new combined, and all new money goes into that combined?
That's right.
I think it would make it cleaner if it was combined. Councillor Rintoul?
Yeah, I'm inclined to agree that I would think that combining it now provides us the opportunity to look at more fulsome project opportunities, and so I would be in favor of combining with immediate effect.
Second.
Further discussion? I'll call the question in favor of combining. All those in favor? Opposed? The motion carries. Thank you. We'll now move to item 13G. We have the 2020 Trucking and Excavating Services staff report dated December 10th.
I move that we approve a 1-year extension to the trucking and excavator service contracts for 2020 with the current provider at the same unit prices as held from 2016 through 2019.
Second.
Discussion? Councillor Keith.
Thank you. So I had concerns about this last year and concerns again this year. And I had a bit of additional information came from staff, which isn't covered in the report, but I think it's relevant, in that my understanding from staff is the plan is to go out for tender for this next year. So through you, Mr. Mayor, to staff, just want to clarify that is the intent, to have a competitive process next year.
It is. We look at maybe putting out a multi-year contract as opposed to 1 year at a time as we used to do.
That's good. So based on that, no, I think it's important for us to have competitive processes for these things. So I'm satisfied that if that's staff's intent to do that for next year, that I would be supportive of the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Garnett?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I still have a problem with it, just strictly on the fact that that's not normal procedure. And I know we're talking about doing it next year, but I'm a stickler for we should do what we've always done, and so I think it should go out for tender now, so I won't support it.
Thank you. Further comments? Councillor Wainwright?
Just for the benefit of the public, there is an Island Equipment Operators Association rate book, which came out in July of this year, and the prices we're being offered are less than half the rate that's in that book. So it seems like a very good deal, and we could put it out to tender. It's possible that the company would bid higher if they did that. So I'm comfortable with the proposal to put it out to RFP next year, but it is significantly under the operator's rate book, and that's something that there's a certain amount of merit in taking advantage of.
Thank you for that. I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? We have one opposed. The motion carries. Thank you. We'll move to item 16, receipt of correspondence for information.
Move receipt. Second.
All those in favor? Motion carries. Thank you. We have no notices of motion, and we have no motion to go on camera. Just before we adjourn, I would just like to extend warmest wishes to my council colleagues, to all of the Town of Sydney's team, and to the public. Warm wishes for a safe and happy Christmas season, and we look forward to serving you in a new decade in January. This is our 41st meeting this year, and thank you, and look forward to serving with you next year.
Merry
Motion to adjourn?
Christmas. Move adjournment.
Second.
Those in favor? Motion carries. Thank you.